Ice Cube is more than a legend. He is a voice that changed American culture, a man whose words and stories shaped a generation. From the raw truth of Straight Outta Compton to the unforgettable heart and humor of Friday, Ice Cube has carved his place in history with honesty, strength, and a fire that never faded. He grew up in one of the toughest neighborhoods in America, yet he rose above the struggle with nothing but determination, talent, and an unbreakable will. His life is a story of resilience, built through hardship, loss, and battles that could have crushed anyone else. But instead of breaking, he transformed the pain into music, into films, and into a legacy that continues to inspire millions. Today at 56, Ice Cube still stands tall, still pushing forward, still carrying the weight of his past and the strength of his journey. But behind the success and the fame, one question lingers. What challenges does he still face, and what storm might still be closing in around him? Before we begin, make sure to hit that like button as a tribute to his incredible life, his unmatched talent, and the spirit that refuses to be defeated. The first cracks in his life didn't come gently. They split open like rising canyons, stretching across the sky long before the world knew his name. Ice Cube was born on June 15, 1969 in Westmont, one small corner of south-central Los Angeles, where daylight often felt thin and the nights seemed to breathe with their own kind of tension. Streetlights flickered over broken sidewalks, and families learned to move through life with a quiet caution, always aware of what dangers might be waiting just beyond their doors. His father, Hosea Jackson, came home each evening with the slow, tired steps of a man who worked long hours on the grounds at UCLA. He carried both pride and a weight he never fully shared. His mother, Doris, spent long days at the hospital and protected her children with a firm, almost fierce love shaped by the things she feared they might face outside. Money wasn't plentiful, but they stretched every dollar with care, creating a sense of stability even when the world around them shook with uncertainty. At their small dinner table, the room often fell into soft quiet, only the clinking of silverware and the steady ticking of an old clock filling the space. Outside, the distant wail of sirens drifted across the neighborhood like a reminder that danger was never far away. In that fragile world, Ice Cube grew up alongside his older brother Clyde, and a family filled with creativity, connected to artists like Del Funky, Homo Sapien, and Cat. That artistic spark lived in their blood. But even creativity couldn't protect a young boy from the heaviness settling slowly into his childhood. The moment that shaped him forever came when he was only 12 years old. It was the kind of moment that pushes childhood out of a home and replaces it with an emptiness no one knows how to fill. His sister Beverly, bright, young, and in her late teens, lost her life in a sudden and unfair tragedy. It shook the family to their core. He remembered the way his mother's knees gave out when she heard the news, her hands covering her face as if she could block out a reality too cruel to accept. His father stood still, staring at the floor, trying to hold on to something solid in a world that had suddenly collapsed beneath him. On the day of the funeral, Ice Cube stood with his hands tucked into his pockets, watching the car pull away. There was a quiet in him that didn't belong to a 12-year-old, a feeling that something deep inside had dropped into a place he would never be able to reach again. Years later, he would softly admit that losing Beverly changed the way he looked at every sunrise. It taught him how fragile life truly is, how quickly someone can be taken simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. In the weeks that followed, their home felt colder. It was as if grief itself had pulled up a chair at their table. Even the smallest bit of laughter felt too heavy to find its way back through the door. His mother began spending long, quiet hours staring out the window, not really looking at anything, just letting the silence settle around her. His father spoke less with each passing day, his words shrinking the same way the light in their home seemed to dim. And Ice Cube moved through the house with slow, careful steps, as if the wrong sound might stir a memory he wasn't ready to face. Grief had changed the air inside those walls, and even though he was still a child, he felt himself aging in ways he couldn't yet explain. Walking through South Central, he carried the heavy awareness of someone who had learned too early that the world didn't promise safety to anyone. The cracked streets beneath his shoes, the heated asphalt of long summer afternoons, and the sharp chill of Los Angeles nights all became part of him. They were reminders that safety was temporary, borrowed, not owned. At school, he often felt like an outsider carrying a weight no one else could see. Even the laughter of classmates sounded far away, as if it came from a place he no longer belonged to. Years later, he would admit that Beverly's absence left an emptiness that shaped every path he took, a quiet ache that lingered in unexpected moments. A song, a scent, a sudden stillness, and reminded him of all the conversations that would never come. But from that emptiness grew a Dree worked the turntables and kept the night pulsing with life. Those parties were loud, chaotic, electric, everything his quiet, grief-filled home was not. And somewhere in that rhythm, something inside him unlocked. Dree felt it too. It wasn't just Cube's delivery, it was the weight behind every line, the precision, the truth that cut clean. At just 16, Ice Cube sold Boys in the Hood to Eazy-E. Fame was nowhere near yet, but something in the air shifted. For the first time, someone outside his neighborhood looked at him and didn't just see a kid from South Central. They saw a voice worth hearing, a truth worth carrying. But the road ahead was far from easy. Rap was brushed aside by many, laughed at or judged before anyone listened. And Ice Cube came from a place too often labeled, ignored, or feared. Some people dismissed him before he even opened his mouth, assuming someone from his streets had nothing meaningful to say. But Cube had already survived something that had broken his world apart. After that, judgment felt small. He kept writing late into the night, letting South Central guide him. The hum of streetlights, the distant sirens, the memories that still pressed against his chest. With every verse, he built something sturdier than any blueprint he had ever studied. A foundation made of truth, resilience, and an unshakable belief that his voice deserved to be heard. And from that foundation, his rise didn't just begin. It became unstoppable. Success didn't come softly to him. It didn't knock or wait politely at the door. It hit his life like a storm, loud, bright, and impossible to ignore. A storm that demanded strength built from every scar he carried. Before the world ever learned his name, that storm was just a quiet spark. It lived in late-night backyard parties, lit only by old porch lights and the steady thump of borrowed speakers. That was where Dr. Dree first heard him. Not just a teenager messing around with rhymes, but a voice cutting through the noise, honest, sharp, and too real to overlook. Cube would later say he remembered the way Dree looked at him that night, like he'd finally heard something he'd been searching for. At only 16, he wrote a Boys in the Hood, selling it to Eazy-E in a moment that changed everything. It wasn't fame yet, not even close. But it was the first time the world answered back when he spoke. The first crack of light breaking through a life shaped mostly by shadows. And in the right hands, even a tiny spark can turn into a blaze. When Ice Cube stepped into NWA, he wasn't just another young rapper trying to make it. He was the sharpest pen in the room, the voice of neighborhoods the rest of America tried to pretend didn't exist. Straight Outta Compton exploded in 1988, forcing the country to face truths it had spent years silencing. His lyrics didn't just entertain, they confronted, exposed, and demanded attention. But while the world echoed his words, the paperwork behind the scenes told a harsher story. Hidden contracts, empty promises, and a paycheck of only $32,000 for an album selling millions. The fire he gave NWA was being smothered by signatures that weren't his. Leaving in 1989 felt like stepping into darkness with no map, no guarantee, and no safety net. But he chose dignity over comfort, knowing honesty often comes with loneliness. The early 90s proved exactly why he had been the backbone all along. Mary Kay Kate's Most Wanted in 1990 hit like a national warning siren. Death Certificate followed in 1991, fearless and too honest for many to swallow. Then The Predator arrived in 1992, selling over 2 million copies and becoming the only album that year to top both the pop and R&B charts. At just 23, he wasn't just making music. He was shaping the country's conversations. But greatness is heavy. He worked 16-hour days, slept on tour buses, lost his voice between shows, and carried expectations that could break even the strongest artists. And as new sounds rose, G-Funk, East Coast waves, and then an entire new generation, his earthquakes slowly became tremors. Few pains cut deeper than watching others rise through the door you smashed open, not knowing who broke it down first. Years later, he admitted that this shift taught him a hard truth. Being a pioneer means learning to stand tall, even when the spotlight moves on. Hollywood wasn't a safe escape. It was another battlefield. In 1991, John Singleton saw something in him, something raw, real, and untrainable. Boys in the Hood turned him into an actor the industry could no longer dismiss. But acceptance didn't come easy. He walked into casting rooms where people saw a rapper before they saw a performer. So he studied scripts until sunrise, rewrote scenes to make them honest, and learned the camera the way he once learned how to survive hardship. Friday didn't just come out in 1995. It arrived like a turning point in his life. It was more than a script, more than a film. It was a piece of his world, written with the same honesty he once poured into rhyme books as a kid. He wrote it, starred in it, and carried it on his back from the first idea to the final frame. A movie made on a small $3.5 million budget suddenly flipped into $28 million at the box office, becoming a cultural classic that generations still repeat, share, and hold on to. It didn't just make people laugh. It made them feel seen. It proved that Ice Cube could shift culture in any room he walked into, whether it was a studio, a stage, or a movie set. Through Cube Vision, he kept proving himself again and again. Barbershop didn't just succeed. It became a franchise, crossing $75 million and turning simple conversations into something iconic. Are we there yet? Nearly hit $100 million, giving families a new kind of story they could enjoy together, showing a softer side he once wondered if people would ever accept from him. Then came 21 Jump Street, loud, wild, and unforgettable, pulling in big numbers and proving he could stand toe-to-toe with the biggest comedy stars of a new generation. But as his career climbed higher, the air grew thin, the pressure grew sharp. There were nights when meetings stretched well past midnight, when exhaustion clung to his bones but responsibility kept him awake. There were budgets so large they didn't feel like numbers anymore. They felt like love explosives he had to carry with both hands, and the fear lingered. The fear that one bad project, one mistake, could send everything crashing down. Success didn't soften the weight on his shoulders. It multiplied it. Every victory raised the stakes of the next risk. Then in 2017, he made one of the boldest moves of his life. He created the BIG3. To critics, it sounded ridiculous. To investors, it sounded dangerous. To most of the world, it sounded impossible. A rapper starting a professional sports league, a full league with real arenas, real athletes, real contracts, real money on the line. But he didn't blink. He built anyway. He sat in boardrooms negotiating deals. He handled lawsuits and licensing. He dealt with partners who doubted him, athletes who questioned him, reporters who dismissed him. Every decision came with more zeros than most people see in a lifetime. And the league burned through millions before earning a single dollar. There were nights he stared at spreadsheets that made his stomach drop. Nights when he wondered if he had finally taken on something too big, too risky, too heavy. He knew that if this failed, it wouldn't just hurt financially, it would leave a scar on his legacy. People wouldn't just question the league. They'd question him, but he kept pushing forward, the same way he pushed through every door that had once slammed shut in his face. The same way he pushed through those endless recording sessions in his early days. The same way he pushed through the chaos of NWA, through betrayal, through rebuilding his name from scratch. The same way he pushed through every painful, proud, messy chapter of becoming who he is. In the end, one truth rose above everything. Ice Cube didn't rise to a net worth of over $150 million because anyone handed him space. He rose because he carved that space out from stone, piece by piece, wound by wound, step by step, turning struggle into focus, turning pain into drive, turning drive into legacy. But even the strongest spirits get tested, and in the last few years, Cube learned that some storms don't roar. Some storms move in softly. In 2021, he quietly walked away from the film Oh Hell No, turning down a role reportedly worth $9 million because he refused to take a vaccine the studio required. He didn't make speeches. He didn't start a war. He didn't try to convert anyone to his side. He simply said a no, a small word that carried a heavy cost. In Hollywood, $9 million isn't just a salary. It's momentum. It's protection. It's a shield that can keep your career strong even when the tides shift. And he walked away from it, knowing exactly what that choice meant. Later, When the cameras were gone and only honesty remained, he admitted the decision hurt. Not because of the money, but because of what it symbolized. That private space where principle and consequence collide always leaves a bruise, and neither side walks away untouched. But the bruise grew darker when something else happened. Something subtle, something invisible. Hollywood moved on, not out of anger, not in retaliation, just quietly, the way time moves forward without looking back. The roles he once would have been first in line for started going to younger names. Rooms he used to command started filling with new faces, new rules, new directions he hadn't signed up for. Opportunities drifted in new directions, almost like the industry was drifting into a season he didn't recognize anymore. He once joked about it. With a weight he didn't hide behind the laugh, Hollywood changes like weather. If you don't keep your coat close, you'll wake up in a season you didn't expect. Behind that joke was a truth every pioneer eventually learns. Sometimes the world you helped build grows without you. Sometimes the spotlight you lit moves on. And sometimes the hardest part of greatness is watching the next chapter unfold without your name on the first page. For him, winter didn't arrive with storms or warnings. It came quietly, cold, still, and unexpected. It settled over his life in a way he didn't see coming. And for a man who had spent his entire career building doors where none existed, realizing the world had stopped checking to see if he was standing on the other side was a pain sharper than any headline, sharper than any public criticism. Still, even in that long, slow season, he carried himself with the same strength he learned in South Central, long before the world ever cared about his name. There were days when the phone didn't ring. Days when a script he believed in drifted into someone else's hands. Days when he walked out of a meeting with polite smiles that hid doubts people were too afraid to say out loud. Days where the whisper, "Your time has passed," seemed louder than the applause he had once earned so easily, but Ice Cube had met that whisper before. He heard it at 19, the day he walked away from NW with nothing but his truth and his talent. He heard it when critics tore apart his early solo work, calling it too raw, too aggressive, too loud. He heard it again when he stepped into acting and people treated him like a rapper pretending to be something else. He heard it when he launched the BIG3 and almost everyone called it a bad idea until it wasn't. Over and over again, the world told him a no, and every time he answered with action. But age changes the weight of things. When you reach 56, being told you might not be needed anymore cuts deeper than it ever did in your 20s. It's a different kind of pain, not a wound you can point to, but something heavy that settles in the chest. Something that turns quiet nights into long conversations with yourself about what chapters are ending and which ones you're still brave enough to begin. Yet even then, he didn't shrink. He didn't bend. He didn't let that winter define him. Because if there is one truth Ice Cube has carried through every phase of his life, it is this. He has never measured his worth by the doors others opened for him, only by the ones he built himself when they wouldn't. Losing a $9 million role didn't break him. Hollywood shifting didn't silence him. If anything, it sharpened him. It stripped away the noise and clarified the man underneath the fame. Today he stands not defeated but defined. He moves with a calm certainty of someone who has survived enough storms to stop fearing the clouds. He continues touring, creating, fighting for the BIG3 and speaking with a grounded, unshakable confidence. Not loud, not desperate, just steady, a man who knows exactly who he is. And if the world has grown louder with opinions, he has grown quieter with purpose. Because in the end, his journey was never about chasing the spotlight. It was about having the strength to stay standing when the spotlight moved away. That strength, more than fame, more than money, more than roles, is the legacy he knows time can never erase. His career bruised him, tested him, reshaped him. But through all of it, his family was the grace that steadied every storm. Long before the world knew his name, Ice Cube met the woman who would outlast every spotlight he ever stood under. Kimberly Woodruff didn't fall for him the first time their paths crossed. Not yet, but there was something about the quiet confidence in her walk that made him stop in a way he wasn't used to. She moved with a gentle grace that seemed to hush the noise around her, and before he even understood why, he found himself searching for her face in crowded hallways long before she ever thought to look back at his. Months passed. Life softened the edges around them both. And in that tender space, she finally began to see him the way he had always seen her. When they married in 1992, he was standing right at the edge of fame, fame that would soon lift him into a different world. Yet behind closed doors, they were simply two young souls counting grocery money under soft yellow kitchen lights, sharing late, humble dinners on a sagging couch that squeaked every time they shifted their weight. Their refrigerator hummed through the night. Their chipped plates clicked together during homemade meals. The thin walls of their first apartment carried their whispered hopes, the kind whispered only by people dreaming of a future they're not yet sure they can reach. Nothing about those early days was glamorous, but everything was real. And without even realizing it, they were laying the quiet, sturdy foundation that would one day carry the weight of an extraordinary life. But foundations, no matter how strong, are always tested. Hollywood offers bright lights, but it asks for shadows in return. And as Ice Cube's star rose higher, the cost at home began to deepen in ways neither of them had prepared for. Kimberly ate dinner alone under a flickering kitchen lamp, her fork scraping gently against a plate that never had a second hand reaching for it. She tucked 5 children into bed on nights when his schedule blurred into airports, cold hotel rooms, and sets that stretched long past midnight. She whispered reassurances she wasn't sure she believed. He missed birthdays, school plays, first steps, moments he tried to piece together later through grainy photographs and rushed phone calls between takes. And then came the night that carved itself into the center of their marriage, their son's birthday. The candles burned low, little pools of wax gathering on the table. The cake leaned slightly, as if even it were waiting. Kimberly checked the door again and again, her chin lifting just a little each time, her hope flickering and fading in the same breath. When their son finally asked, "Is Dad coming?" she knelt beside him, smoothed his hair back and whispered, "He's trying," but Ice Cube didn't make it home. Hours later, he stood in the hallway, keys still in his hand, listening to the heavy silence pressing against the wall. Through a cracked door, he saw Kimberly sitting alone at the table, her head bowed, balloons drooping behind her like worn-out dreams. On the couch, their son slept with a wrap gift meant for his father still clutched tightly in his small hand. And in that still, breathless moment, something inside Cube fractured. A truth cut through him sharp as broken glass. He had gained the world, but he was losing the moments that mattered most. What saved them wasn't some grand apology or sweeping gesture. It was the quiet bravery of staying even when it hurt, staying even when it meant beginning again. Ice Cube started coming home differently, slower, more present. He would sit on the edge of his children's beds long after midnight, listening to the soft rhythm of their breathing and wondering how many nights he had already missed. Kimberly noticed the change, the way he stood in doorways as if relearning the shape of their home, the way his shoulders eased when he held the children just a moment longer than before, and she softened too. Instead of pulling away, she leaned in, their 5 children, O'Shea Jr., Daryl, Karima, Deja, and Sharif, unknowingly stitched their parents back together with every need, every laugh, every small hand reaching for both mother and father at the same time. And in 2015, when O'Shea Jr. stepped into his father's shoes to portray him in Straight Outta Compton, reliving the pain and triumph of Cube's youth, the family sat together in a dark theater. As the scenes flickered across the screen, Cube watched his life reflected back at him through his son's eyes, every struggle, every bruise, every victory. And something inside him healed with a softness he never expected. In that soft, flickering glow, he wasn't the icon the world celebrated. He wasn't the legend etched into music history. He was simply a husband, a father, and eventually a grandfather, roles that rooted him in a way fame never could. The titles that truly mattered were the ones whispered in small voices at sunrise or shouted in laughter across a living room filled with toys, socks, and memories. Today their home is imperfect in all the beautiful ways real homes. Arguments rise and fall like quick storms, misunderstandings sting and then melt into forgiveness, and doors close only to open again with calmer hearts. But through it all, the house stays warm, steady, lived in, earned one stubborn, loving day at a time. Ice Cube often says that success never taught him how to love. Family did. And Kimberly, the woman who once walked past him without a second glance, became something like a compass, quietly guiding him through every high, every heartbreak, and every moment where the world felt too loud to bear. In a place like Hollywood, where marriages often burn out faster than opening weekend numbers, there stands like a steady light that refuses to dim, even when the winds shift and shadows try to swallow the glow. For every parent fighting to hold their family together, for every couple weathering their own quiet storms, their journey carries a truth worth holding on to. Love isn't built in perfect years. It's forged in imperfect days survived hand in hand. And sometimes the greatest victories in a man's life don't happen under spotlights or applause. They happen at the kitchen table, during late-night conversations over cold leftovers with the people who never stopped waiting for him to walk through the door. The world remembers the day Eazy-E left us, the headlines that flashed across television screens, the stunned silence that spread through Los Angeles like a slow head. Cube reached for the metal handle, and his hand just stopped. He froze there, staring at the floor tiles, because looking up meant confronting a truth that didn't seem real yet. "I didn't know what I would have said," he later admitted, words almost whispered, heavy in the way only regret can be. But fate doesn't wait for the right moment. On March 26, 1995, Eazy-E was gone, sudden, brutal, final, and with him went the last fragile chance to repair what had broken between them. Los Angeles mourned loudly, tributes, tears, headlines, everything bigger than life. But Ice Cube mourned in silence, carrying something that never fully loosened in his chest. At the funeral, surrounded by cameras and fans and the echo of a legend taken far too soon, he stood with a weight that no reporter could ever capture. He didn't cry in public. He never really had. But the people closest to him said the sorrow settled deep, becoming one of those wounds that never truly closes, only teaches. In the years that followed, Cube spoke about Eazy-E with a gentleness that peeled back every layer of old tension. The world had turned their story into headlines, into drama, into myth. But behind all of that, Cube remembered him not as a rival, not as a business partner tangled in contracts and disagreements, but as the friend who took a chance on a 16-year-old kid with a notebook full of reams. "We were just kids," Cube said once, softly, like the words still carried the warmth of the past. The kids trying to make something out of nothing. Maybe that's why the loss hurt as deeply as it did. Not because of what they achieved together, but because of who they were before the fame. Young, reckless, brilliant in their own messy ways. Two boys believing they had all the time in the world. Believing that, no matter how far they drifted, there would always be another moment to fix what had broken. And tall hedges wrapped the property, keeping cameras out and keeping peace in. A sanctuary built not from luck, but from a life spent pushing past every barrier. And if his real estate speaks to his rise, his garage finishes the sentence. A car collection worth nearly $700,000, each vehicle chosen with intention. A flawless '64 Chevy Impala lowrider, a tribute to the streets that shaped him. A Rolls-Royce Ghost, quiet and precise. A Porsche Panamera that blends speed with elegance. A Cadillac Escalade for family trips and grounded moments. And several custom rides crafted in the unmistakable West Coast style that Ice Cube himself helped define. Each vehicle in Cube's garage is more than metal and horsepower. They're mile markers, physical reminders of every step he's taken from the cracked pavement of South Central to the polished floors of success. For a man who began with little more than a head full of reams and an ironclad determination, these homes and cars aren't trophies of excess. They are monuments to survival. Symbols of a life rebuilt, reshaped and lifted by grit, reinvention, and a legacy built for the generations who will follow him. But none of this, none of the glass walls or gated estates, defines the core of Ice Cube's empire. At its heart, his empire is built on vision. Music opened the first door. Film expanded that doorway into something massive. Producing strengthened his control behind the scenes, and entrepreneurship that ensured he'd never have to wait for anyone else to hand him an opportunity. When he co-founded the Big3 League in 2017, the world raised its eyebrows. Critics doubted him, questioned whether a rapper could build a legitimate sports league from the ground up. But Cube had spent his entire life proving people wrong. Quietly, relentlessly, he pushed forward, negotiating with investors, securing arena partnerships, drafting contracts with retired NBA icons, making hundreds of decisions the public would never see. Piece by piece, he turned doubt into credibility and credibility into profit. He knew what most people miss. Applause fades, trends evolve, fame comes and goes like weather. But ownership endures, investments endure, vision endures. Today, when he stands in a home overlooking the ocean or walks across the lawn of a sprawling estate, when his garage glitters like a private showroom, all of it testifies to the same truth. Dreams built from nothing can rise into legacies built to last. At home, Ice Cube's world is calmer now, fuller, more grounded, shaped by the family he and Kimberly have spent over 30 years building and protecting. They still carry the same partnership they vowed to in 1992, but the rhythm of their life has changed. What once revolved around deadlines, premieres, and constant motion now revolves around something gentler. Routine, stability, and the voices of grown children carving out futures of their own. Their oldest, O'Shea Jackson Jr., has carved a name for himself in Hollywood, often dropping by for late-night dinners or bringing his child along, turning Ice Cube into a grandfather, revealing a side of him the world rarely sees. Darryl works in the world of music and production, following creative paths behind the curtain. Karima and Deja choose privacy, building lives away from cameras, stepping gracefully out of the spotlight. And Sharif, the youngest, moves between artistic pursuits and family gatherings with the confidence of someone raised in a home where structure met love. These days, the Ice Cube household isn't defined by chaos or hustle. It's defined by rhythm. Quiet mornings with sunlight flooding wide rooms. Kimberly reading in the kitchen while Cube reviews schedules or checks BIG3 updates with a quiet focus. Some days, all 5 kids fill the home, laughter echoing around the long dining table. On others, it's just Cube and Kimberly walking the property at sunset, talking about their children, their grandchild, and the simple grace of reaching an age where family means more than any red carpet ever could. Holidays have grown bigger, louder, but warmer. Grandbaby toys scattered across the living room. Cousins catching up in corners. Kimberly cooking dishes everyone waits for all year. The kind of gatherings that remind Cube that, in the end, the legacy he built doesn't just sit in studios or contracts, it lives around his dining table. And Cube moves through the house these days with the slow content rhythm of a man who has finally learned how to enjoy the life he spent decades building. He still works, still tours, still produces, still steers the BIG3 with the determination of a man who refuses to let his vision slip. But when he walks through his front door, he leaves the noise of the public world behind. Here, he is not Ice Cube the rapper, not the mogul, not the cultural titan. Here, he is simply him, a husband whose favorite place in the entire world is still the sofa beside the woman who has stood with him through every storm. A father who offers advice over backyard barbecues, leaning against a railing as smoke curls into the evening sky. A grandfather who bends down a little slower now, whose knees remind him of the years he's carried, but whose smile shines wider than anything he ever put on stage. And in this chapter of his life, that role, steady, present, the center of gravity for 3 generations, has become the one he treasures beyond all the others. Philanthropy threads quietly through his work. He never makes a spectacle of it. He has no interest in applause for doing what he believes is right. But those close to him know he invests in programs aimed at giving young creators and underserved communities something far more valuable than charity. He gives them possibility, access, resources, mentorship, a shot, because he remembers what it felt like to need a door that didn't yet exist, and so he builds them for others. That belief, helping people carve their own path, sits at the heart of everything he touches, from business choices to private acts of generosity no camera will ever see. Even with decades of success behind him, comfort around him, and a legacy already carved into the culture, Ice Cube carries himself with the quiet confidence of a man who has earned every inch of his piece. He's still out there on the road, still stacking projects, still showing up at Lakers and Dodgers games with the same subtle fire that's burned inside him since the very first day he picked up a pen and refused to let anyone silence him. Under his guidance, the BIG3 keeps growing, expanding, strengthening, becoming something bigger than anyone expected. And when he steps onto a stage, whether it's a roaring arena or a small, intimate venue, the crowd feels it immediately. That charge, that presence, that unmistakable energy of someone who remembers exactly what it was like to fight for a single microphone. Time has touched him, yes, but it hasn't dulled him. It has refined him. There's a calmness in his eyes now, a clarity in his voice, a sense that he understands the world can twist and change all at once. The man at the center, the core of who he is, remains unshaken. So as we close this chapter of Ice Cube's life, what remains isn't just a lesson, it's a feeling, a quiet realization that every life, whether lived in the spotlight or lived in the shadows, carries storms of its own, victories of its own, moments where everything shifts beneath your feet, and moments where you rise anyway. Maybe it's his resilience, maybe it's his honesty, maybe it's his unwavering humanity, maybe it's the way he continues to climb even when the world redraws the rules beneath him. And if something in his journey lingered with you, an image, a memory, a truth, share it with us in the comments below. Your voice is part of this story too. If tonight's story touched you, even for a moment, feel free to tap the like button and stay connected with our Golden American Stars family. From all of us here, we wish you a home warmed with peace, a heart steady with health, days brushed by happiness, and a life so rich with purpose that each sunrise feels like a gift. May you walk forward protected, strengthened, and surrounded by everything your spirit has quietly hoped for. Extended outro requested. More length, more emotion. And before we sign off tonight, we invite you to take one last breath with us, not of sadness, but of gratitude. Gratitude for the artists who dared to speak when their voices were unwelcome. Gratitude for the pioneers who carried the weight so the next generation could walk lighter. Gratitude for men like Ice Cube who remind us that greatness isn't measured only in awards or wealth, but in the courage to evolve, the willingness to heal, and the discipline to keep building even when no one is watching. Because stories like his aren't just entertainment, they're reminders. Reminders that the road from hardship to legacy is not a straight line, that there will be losses, misunderstandings, regrets that echo years later, but there will also be triumphs, transformations, family dinners full of laughter. Days where the light hits just right, and you realize you survived everything meant to break you. Ice Cube's journey is all of that, raw, unpolished, triumphant, human. And as we close the page on tonight's tribute, may his story leave you with one lingering truth. It's never too late to grow. Never too late to make peace. Never too late to rewrite your future. Thank you for spending your evening with us. Thank you for honoring his journey. And thank you for being part of this community, where every story finds a home and every voice matters. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. And remember, greatness begins with a single choice to keep going.